Okay, so welcome. Thank you everyone for joining. And of course, just a few days before Purim, it made sense to do a Shiur on Purim. And I've entitled it the story behind the Purim story. But before we get to the title, the story behind, I think it's important to just briefly go through the actual Purim story, although I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but also to put the historic context, to give us the historic context to it as well. So we're going to just start with that briefly, and then we'll go on to the story behind the Purim story. So let's look at first the historical context. We need to understand that the miracle of Purim occurred while the Jewish people were undergoing the first of two exiles that were foretold by the Nevi'im, by the prophets. It was a 70-year exile that wasn't characterized by great persecution up until Haman's decree, up until Haman comes onto the scene. But nevertheless, we see a gradual spiritual decline, which was the catalyst for eventually Haman's decree and what we know as the Purim story. Okay, so let's just give a bit of context. When the Purim story occurs, the Purim story begins about roughly 900 years after Yetziat Mitzrayim, after the exodus from Egypt. The Jews had been living continuously in Israel since they first entered under Yoshua ben Nun, under Joshua. We have 410 years that King Solomon's temple stood in Jerusalem, and that temple at Beit HaMikdash being the focal point of Jewish spiritual and Jewish national life in Israel. However, the first major tragedy that the Jewish people in this era experience comes about with the division of Israel, division of the country into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Yehuda, of Judea. The northern kingdom, we know, was made up of the 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. And this northern kingdom was invaded by the Assyrians under Sanherib, who exiled the Jews. The policy of Sanherib was one of forced exile and assimilation, and this directly caused the loss of the 10 tribes, the loss of the 10 tribes of the Jewish people. Less than 100 years later, the Jews are dealt another terrible blow, and this time it's by the Babylonians under their ruler Nebuchadnezzar. He invades Israel, he destroys the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, and exiled almost all of the remaining tribes, those being Yehuda, Binyamin, as well as the priests and the Levites. And where do they go? They go to Babylon. Again, to put that into modern geography, that would be Iraq, what we know as Iraq today. So that's the Babylonian exile. Jeremiah. So the prophet Jeremiah had warned that there would be the destruction of the temple, that there would be the exile. But at the same time, Jeremiah also predicted that the Jews would return to Israel, would rebuild the temple and their homeland. But he actually goes further, does Jeremiah. He doesn't give that bold prediction, but he also says that he declares that the temple is going to be rebuilt after a period of 70 years following its destruction. Even though we've got this prophecy of of Jeremiah, there were still many amongst the Jewish people who didn't believe that they would ever return to Israel. In fact, that they actually thought that this exile signified the end of the relationship that they had with Hashem. The bond had been broken. The majority thought the bond between God and his holy Jewish people. We have the Jewish people, as a result, becoming assimilated. They became acclimatized, unfortunately, to the conditions of exile. And they, in fact, built a thriving, well-organized Jewish community in Babylonia, as we said, in modern-day Iraq, and the surrounding, or should I say, neighboring Persia, which today we would know as Iran. Okay, now what happens? And you see, I've put the point, the Persian exile and Achashverosh. We have the Persian Empire, which eventually takes over Babylon. And we have this military leader by the name of Ahasuerus. He takes over the throne. He becomes the supreme ruler of the Persian Empire. And now this Ahasuerus, this ruler, he actually miscalculates. And he thinks that the 70 years that Jeremiah had predicted that the Jewish people, 70 years after the destruction of the first temple, would go back to Israel and build this second temple. He thought that the 70-year period had come and gone. And as a result, he figured that the Jews were now doomed to remain in exile. He was really chuffed because the Jews had outlived and survived all their other enemies, the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, except now Ahasuerus and the Persian Empire still survived. And he believed that Ahasuerus, that his empire was the eternal one. He was immortal, and so was his kingdom. And in his mind, the mind of Ahasuerus, the permanent exile of the Jewish people was an indication that that his empire would survive forever. Okay, so that brings us into the Purim story. We have Nebuchadnezzar, because he was of this belief, wow, I'm still around, my empire is still around, the 70 years has come and gone, the Jews are still in exile, they're going to be in exile forever. To celebrate the so-called, this perceived permanent victory, he threw the party of all parties. What is he used? What are the vessels used in this party? It's the holy vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had looted and plundered from the holy temple in Jerusalem. However, what becomes even more tragic is the fact that we know that Jewish people themselves were at this party. They partook, never mind the fact that the food may have been kosher, but eating out of the vessels of the holy temple. In fact, that's what our rabbis tell us was in fact the cause of the near fatal decree of Haman, because of the Jewish people partaking of this feast. The one thing you can say that they had to be there, otherwise maybe they were risk of being put to death. But don't enjoy yourselves, don't make a whole feast and party of it yourselves. Okay, so that takes us, that's just a brief historical context for the story of Purim. If we just go through now the actual Purim events, and again, I'm just going to go really just in point form, because again, we're hopefully all familiar with it, but let's go through it. If we were to summarize the Megillat Esther, the story of Esther, we'd summarize it into the following points. As I just said previously in painting the context, we have King Ahasuerus of Persia. He rules the entire, let's call it the civilized world at the time, and incorporates 127 provinces. The Megillah tells us, Mehoidu v'ad Kush, that would be modern day India to Ethiopia. As we said, he holds a massive feast, a massive party for all his subjects. At this particular feast, he asks the then queen, Vashti, to parade naked, to parade undressed in front of his guests. Again, she refuses. I'm not going to go into all the details. I'm just giving it in very, very broad strokes. She refuses. He gets angry and he puts Vashti to death. Against her will, our heroine of the story, Esther, she's chosen in a royal beauty contest to be the next queen, the next wife of Ahasuerus. She's taken to the palace, but she keeps her identity, her nationhood a secret. We read in the Megillah that by divine providence, Mordechai overhears two guards in the royal palace plotting to assassinate the king. He tells Esther about this. Esther tells the king in the name of Mordechai what Mordechai had told her. This gets recorded in the book of Chronicles, the royal chronicles, but yet the king doesn't know anything about it at this stage. Okay, move swiftly along. Haman, the evil Haman now becomes, let's call it second in command. If it colloquially we'd say he becomes prime minister, the king's prime minister. He decrees, power really gets to his head. He decrees that everyone should bow down to him. We know that Mordechai refuses to bow, and this obviously really gets the back of Haman up. He gets enraged. And when Haman learns that Mordechai is a Jew, he doesn't only want to take revenge against Mordechai alone, but he seeks to destroy the entire Jewish people. How does he go about this? Haman complains to the king. He says the Jews, there's this nation, they keep their own laws. They refuse to be like everyone else. Haman bribes the king, and the king is only too happy to let Haman issue a decree to destroy the Jews. What happens then is, on hearing the news of the impending destruction of the entire Jewish people, Mordechai fasts, Mordechai prays, he wears sack and ashcloth, and sackcloth and ash, should I say? Sorry, I thought that didn't sound right. He informs Esther of the evil plan, because again, at this stage, Esther didn't know of it, and he urges her to plead to the king for mercy. We know that Esther is afraid of approaching the king, because we know that it's a publicized law that no one can come before the king without officially being invited, without called upon to do so. They risked being killed. Mordechai, though, explains the seriousness, the gravity of the situation, and that he says that perhaps Hashem put Esther into this position solely for this purpose of saving the Jewish people. Esther agrees to this. She puts her own life at risk. She approaches the king. She finds favor in the king's eyes. She tells Mordechai to have the Jewish people fast and pray for 3 days that she should be spared. That's just before she comes, before King Ahasuerus. Esther, as I said, is favorably received by King Ahasuerus. He agrees to join her at the banquet, and this banquet was made for the king as well as for Haman. There were 2 banquets, the first one and the second one. The night following the first banquet, the king is unable to sleep. He sends for his royal chronicles to be read, and for the first time he becomes aware that Mordechai wasn't repaid for the great kindness of saving his life, in that he told him of the plan of Bigtan and Teresh, the 2 gods that wanted to assassinate the king. Again, divine providence. Haman enters the palace area to talk to the king. He wants to tell the king that he wants to hang Mordechai. And just before Haman's able to speak, the king asks Haman, after reading what had been done, what Mordechai had done for him, and nothing had been repaid to Mordechai. So the king asks Haman, what should I do to bestow honor upon someone who I want to honor? And you can picture Haman. He assumes that the king is referring to him. Haman suggests that such a person should be clothed in the royal attire, should be put on the king's horse, should be led out in front of everyone in great honor, shouted out in front of this person. The king thinks this is too marvelous, and he tells Haman to do exactly this. He shouldn't not do any of this, and he subsequently leads out Mordechai in front of everyone, honors Mordechai, and obviously Haman is greatly embarrassed. At the next banquet, this is banquet number 2, Esther finally tells the king of her identity and this plan of genocide. The king is outraged, and he wants to know who is the person that is threatening her people. Esther points out it's Haman Hara, the evil Haman. Haman is in the same area. He obviously fears, he's aghast, he doesn't know what to do. Fast forward a little bit, Haman falls before Esther to plead his case. The king sees Haman falling before her. He thinks that now Haman is trying to take advantage of the queen, and he directs that Haman be killed on the very same gallows that he had intended to hang Mordechai. Leads us to point number 4, that the original decree to annihilate the Jewish people had been sent out. There was Haman's decree signed by the king, but there was a law that anything that was previously issued by the king could not be reversed. So the king had to send out another edict, this time dictated by Mordechai, that gave the Jews the right to fight, defend themselves and to kill all those enemies who wanted to kill them. The Jews duly, they do defend themselves, they kill their enemies. Most of the enemies cower in terror. We have in the city of Shushan that the fighting takes place for 2 days, on the 13th and the 14th. In all other areas, it's only on the 13th. That's why in all areas besides Shushan, Purim is celebrated on the 14th, because that's when they rested from the war. And why in all walled cities, walled in the times of Joshua, and that would include Shushan, and today we'd include Jerusalem, they celebrate Purim on the 15th, because they only rested after the 14th, because the 14th was still a day of fighting. And just to conclude this context, Mordechai and Esther enact an annual holiday that we know today as Purim, with feasting, with the giving gifts to the poor, food to friends, and reading the Megillah. And in fact, they actually wrote the Megillah, Mordechai and Esther. Okay, so that's really just what you know already, which leads into what I hope is the main part of the Shiur, which I said was the story behind the story of Purim. So I've just gone through what we all know to be the story of Purim. Okay, so as I've put there, what is remarkable to note is that the Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther, which is a book of Tanakh, it forms part of the Ketuvim, the writings, doesn't mention the name of Hashem even once. Why? The central theme of Purim is the presence of Hashem behind the scenes, so to speak. Though we may not see him, his name isn't mentioned in the Megillah. His guidance, we see, is never absent from his people, from the Jewish people. And in fact, we can even see this in the, and I'll go through it again, how the Megillah plays out. We actually see Hashem, though his name is not mentioned, we see the divine providence playing out in the book of Esther. We have Queen Vashti being killed for something that's really innocuous. The fact that now there's a vacancy for a queen, Esther is chosen to fill that vacancy. The fact that Mordechai, of all people, had to be the one that overheard the two people plotting against the king, and that gets subsequently written into the book of Chronicles, the Royal Chronicles, and yet Mordechai isn't rewarded at that very moment. The king doesn't know it at that stage. We have Haman that's seeking to destroy the Jewish people. He gets elevated to the role, to the position of prime minister of Persia, modern day Iran. The fact that Achashverosh suffers from insomnia the night before Esther's monumentous request to save her people. And at that time, the king, when he's suffering from insomnia, for the first time discovers that Mordechai was never rewarded for saving his life. At that very instant, Haman happens to be just outside the king's door, waiting for authorization to hang Mordechai. The king preempts Haman and asks how they should honor someone, that someone being Mordechai. And Achashverosh tells Haman to honor Mordechai in full public view. So again, just a few of the points where we see, even though Hashem's name is not mentioned expressly, we see Hashem, so to speak, orchestrating, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Part B, the hand of Hashem in the natural world. So again, anyone else may just read the Megillah, if they don't have a Jewish mindset, and just see it as a whole string of coincidences. But we in fact see Hashem's, we see divine providence. Interesting to point out, I thought I'd mention it here, although it possibly not linked to the rest of the theme, but in the Gemara, in the Talmud Bavli, the Gemara asks, it says, Esther mina Torah minayin. Where do we see, is there any allusion in the Torah itself, in the 5 books of Moses itself, to Esther? And the Gemara answers, yes. The pasuk says, "Va'anochi haster astir Ponai Bayomahu. This comes from the portion of Vayelech in the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim, where Hashem says that times are going to come when maybe the Jewish people will depart from the correct path, and I, God, am going to conceal myself, and that's the name, Aster Astir. I'm going to conceal. So Esther, the name itself, represents divine concealment. Purim is all about discovering Hashem in the natural world. If we look at the actual name of Purim, we see that this point is embodied even in the name of the festival itself. Why is it called Purim? Why is it not called Mordechai? Why is it not called Esther? Why is it not called the festival of miracles, the festival of concealment? Why Purim? Purim, we know it's named after Purim, which means lots. Lots. The singular is Pur. If you think about it, on the face of it, there's nothing more natural than the drawing of lots. Why? Because one lot will always emerge from the lottery, from the drawing. So one can never claim that, can never claim mistakenly that this lot only came about by chance. But even more than that, and here's the thing where we see absolute divine providence. We see many times in Torah itself where Torah uses a goral, uses lots. We find when the lands are to be equitably distributed between the tribes, this is before going into the land of Israel. It says the land was going to be divided by goral, by a lot. And it wasn't, we as Jews know, it wasn't just simply a random lot, but it was Hashem. Hashem, so to speak, was determining what was going to come out. So even though, yes, it may seem random, it may seem a lottery, what is pulled out from the hat, so to speak, that is absolutely still divine intervention. Hashem still deciding, in the case of the land being distributed, what land would go to what particular tribe. So the issue of costumes, dress up. No, it's not the Jewish Halloween. Why do we disguise ourselves on Purim? Precisely is what I've said. Purim is not what it seems to be. So again, if you ask the questions, was the killing of Vashti simply one of those things that would ordinarily have happened by a very corrupt, by a very base king who happens to get very intoxicated? Was it just coincidence that Mordechai, as I said, happened to overhear the plot to kill the king? Did Achashverosh simply choose Esther because she was the most beautiful of all the girls in all the 127 provinces? Esther happened to be the most beautiful of all of them. Was it plain bad luck that Haman happened to be visiting Achashverosh at the precise time when Achashverosh first found out for the first time that Mordechai had saved his life? Was it simply Esther's charm, her, should we say, seducing the king? I say it in the best possible term, not, God forbid, any sexual connotation, that made the king suddenly hang his favorite, up until that point, minister Haman? And obviously the answers are no. Purim was instituted because the Jewish people at the time understood that it was God himself, who did all of these things. Why? To save the Jewish people. He was just disguising himself as, I guess we could just say, think of it as a great Persian soap opera playing out. That's how it would seem. You know, maybe we have a mini series, maybe we had Netflix hit, the Persian Feast. No, God was ultimately behind all of it. If you look at, maybe actually before I go on to the next point about national salvation, it's important to think that Purim is the day of the year where we have the greatest celebration, more than Hanukkah, more than Rosh Hashanah, more than any other celebration of the year. Purim is the one the most joyous because, yes, on the one hand, we might think it's great to celebrate miracles, but how often in our world today do those massive miracles like the splitting of the sea happen? No. They don't happen today. But truly far more exhilarating is coming to the realization that nothing is as it seems, that God is always pulling the strings, and there are always those small miracles that are hidden within nature that others would maybe just see as just happenings, just those coincidences. I said here, the natural salvation of Purim enables us to see Hashem even when he's hidden. So maybe you can, if you can just imagine two people are given a particular job. They're given a job of trying to recognize people at night. Okay, so the first individual, he decides to use a torch so that he'd be able to see the faces of the people, and when it's nighttime, he's able to recognize them. The second individual didn't have a torch, but what he did, he trained himself to recognize people's voices, and through their voices to be able to discern who those people are. Okay, so now let's try to decide which one is going to have a greater level of clarity. So certainly the first one was going to be superior to the second, because seeing a person's face is always going to be more, much clearer, much starker than recognizing someone's voice. But on the other hand, let's think about it. The second person actually has an advantage over the first. Why? Because the second person isn't utilizing anything external, a torch. He's now actually developed a new skill. What's that skill? Recognizing voices. That's not a skill that's been developed, cultivated by the first one. Okay, so now what happens in the morning? In the morning now, when the sun rises, the first one doesn't need his torch anymore. It's no use. A torch isn't any use in broad daylight. He would have gained nothing then from the experience of the night. He had the torch helped him, but is he taking anything with him into the daylight that he'd learned, that he'd garnered from the night? No. But the second person who in those dark moments, in the darkness, had now learned a new skill, he's able to not only use that in the dark, but even in the day. And again, there's obviously a mashal, this is obviously a parable, but it speaks to how there are always two ways to overcome darkness, to overcome the challenge. And of course, this doesn't only speak to the darkness that preceded the miracle of Purim, but in fact speaks to overcoming challenges at all times. Are we going to try to develop skills that are going to take us even into those moments where the darkness, please God, is no longer there? Or are we only going to find, utilize external things that are only going to help us for that particular moment? So going now back to the story of Purim, the Jewish people are compared to this individual in my story who developed this keen sense of listening. The Jewish people in the story of Purim were able to listen attentively, were able to hear, see, and experience Hashem even in the darkness. The last thing I want to state, point number 5 over there, is what Purim led to was great confidence, I've said, of the Jewish people to follow the Torah even at a time of concealment of the divine presence in the world. Okay, it's all very easy to serve Hashem when you can see him in the Beit HaMikdash, see his presence, when you can see him in the clouds of glory in the desert. But what's happening when he's concealed? Are you still going to be observant? The fact that you've got protagonists like Esther, like Mordechai, prepared to sacrifice their own lives, to put it all on the line, so to speak, even during the concealment, even in the greatest of darkness, that was tremendous confidence that it gave to the Jewish people from this moment and onwards to say that we don't need the great revelation, we don't need all the great miracles. We're able to serve Hashem and have such tremendous faith even at a time, and maybe I could go further, precisely in a time of great darkness. Okay, I just want to go on to the next section, and I've got one more section after this that I want to try cover. So I want to discuss the issue of Purim being the eternal festival. So we have a midrash. This midrash comes on Mishlei, the book of Proverbs written by King Solomon. And it says that all the festivals are destined to be nullified in the times of Mashiach. So in times of Mashiach, all the other festivals are going to be redundant. They're not going to be required. They're going to be nullified. But the days of Purim will never be nullified. And the Midrash quotes the very verse that we read in Megillat Esther, V'mea Purim ha'ele, these days of Purim will never leave the Jewish people, and their memory will not be lost to its children. I put there point 2. Purim reveals how evil can become part of the divine revelation. So let me say like this. We can possibly understand the words of our rabbis when they say that in the times of a Mashiach, all of the holidays will be nullified, except, as I've said, Purim. So let's try to understand the common denominator between the revelations that, please God, will take place during the times of Mashiach, during the times of the Messiah, and the revelation of Purim. What's the common denominator? Is the understanding, and this is what we grapple with today. And I've promised B'nai to give a shiur on this in the coming weeks. What do we grapple with? Understanding how evil serves as a means to bring about revelation of Hashem's unity. That everything develops according to Hashem's plan, according to Hashem's will, despite what may at the particular time appear as bad, appear as evil. And this is ultimately what's going to be the great revelation at the times of Mashiach, the times of the Messiah. Everyone will understand. Hashem will explain. It'll be so abundantly clear. It'll be almost retroactively understood how everything, even the things that we perceive to be bad, was leading to a divine purpose. This is obviously the great revelation of Purim. Within the hidden actions, without overstepping the boundaries of natural events, and notwithstanding what appeared to be evil, bad, Haman, the decree to annihilate the Jewish people, but ultimately the good was revealed. The divine plan of Hashem was revealed. So all of the holidays will be nullified. Those are the other holidays. Why? This means that because of Hashem's future revelations to us, they're going to be much greater than all the other previous ones. At Pesach, all the other Yom Tovim are not going to have any particular meaning. Only the one that's going to remain is going to be Purim, because Purim shares that same purpose of being able to show how everything had a true, good, divine purpose, even though at the time it appeared that it may have been bad. If I could summarize, I could say that Purim heightens our ability to perceive Hashem in the events that occur in the natural world. Obviously, this is going to happen even much greater, at a much greater level in the times of Mashiach. What I want to end with is a section that I've called The Great Enemy Strikes Again. Great Enemy Strikes Again. What do I mean by this? So, although the Jewish people have encountered unfortunately, many enemies during our history, so in that we can include the Plishtim, the Philistines, the Assyrians, more recently the Babylonians, the Romans. There's one nation that really stands out as the arch nemesis, as the arch enemy of the Jewish people, and that is Amalek. Amalek is so brazen. Amalek attacks the Jewish people as they leave Egypt. They know of all the miracles that have already occurred to the Jewish people and have the chutzpah to attack the Jewish people at that juncture when they leave Egypt. And because of that brazenness, we have, and we read about this. We read about it on Purim as well. The Purim reading, we're told to always. We have an instruction to wipe out Timchet Zecher Amalek. We read the Shabbat Zachor. We read this last Shabbat. We obviously have, and we all know this, Amalek rises again during the time of Purim. Haman, the enemy of the Jewish people, the one who conceives of the plan to annihilate the Jewish people, he was an Amalekite, and I'll go through that now, where we see it clearly in the Megillat Esther. So I put the question there: what's the origin of the nation of Amalek, And perhaps to broaden that question is, what does Amalek represent? More broadly, what does it represent? The Gemara asks the question similar to the one we had regarding Esther previously. It says, Haman mina Torah minayin. Where is Haman's name? Is there an allusion to Haman in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses? There's a deeper question that the Gemara is actually asking. Not just do we have a reference to Haman in the Torah, but if there is an allusion to Haman in the Torah, it must represent what Haman represents, must also be rooted in the Torah. So if we could therefore locate in the Torah where Haman's name is mentioned, perhaps we'll be able to grasp what is the essence of Haman, and therefore what is the essence of Amalek. Okay, so is there an answer? Yes, there actually is an answer. The Gemara answers that we find the name of Haman, and it's mentioned just after the sin, just after Adam, the first man created, eat from the forbidden fruit. God appears to Adam in the garden, and he says like this, he says, Hamin ha'etz, hey mem non, voweled as we vowel it, as we read it, Hamin ha'etz. He asks the question of Adam, did you eat of this fruit that I forbade you to eat? But the word Hamin, hey mem non, voweled differently, and we know the Torah was given without vowels, can also mean Haman. Okay, so now we need to ask our question, what does Haman have to do with Adam eating from the tree? The message being conveyed must obviously be fundamental, because it's really located right at the beginning, right in Bereshit. This is the beginning of transgression. So what the rabbis are teaching, what they learn out in this Gemara, is that what Haman is in the world, what Haman represents, what Amalek represents, must somehow be intimately connected with that root of that very first sin itself. And what is the root of that sin? Point number 2, it really is distancing from Hashem. When Hashem asks Adam, Hamina ate, did you eat from that forbidden fruit? It's actually a question, it's actually an expression of the distance now that's come about between man and his creator, between Adam and Hashem, as a result of man, as a result of Adam's sin. Adam, at this time, when he now eats from the fruit, he's lost his clarity. He's moved that much away from Hashem, that much away from his creator. He lost that spiritual vision. I mean, the verse actually says, the eyes now open up. They've got now a new vision. Now it's a physical vision. It's no longer a spiritual vision that they had before. It's a new sense of reality. But the consequences are quite severe. We actually find that Hashem then says to Adam, he says, first of all, he asks him the question, did you do this? He asks him, where are you? Did you eat? What? Hashem now needs to ask. What do you mean Hashem has to ask? Hashem knows. But Hashem now, so to speak, plays the same game as Adam. Adam, you now set new rules. I'm going to play by the same rules. And make as if the master of the universe doesn't know things. The master of the universe is not in control. The creator that created the world is no longer pulling all the strings. What happens at that time when Adam eats from the fruit and he no longer has the clarity? We have the distance now between Adam and Hashem. We have doubt, safek, doubt entering the world. Perhaps, Adam says, perhaps it is possible to hide from God. Perhaps God doesn't see. Perhaps he doesn't know what I've done. Perhaps he doesn't know that I've transgressed. There's a gap that's open now between God, the creator, and his creation. And this gap is the gap of doubt. And this doubt is synonymous with Amalek. For the first time, we have Amalek entering the world, and we can say that Haman has been born. Let me try to explain that differently. Amalek becomes a nation whose doubt of God evolves into the very denial of God. So that explains why Amalek becomes the eternal enemy of the Jewish people. immediately after, and again, this puts it into context, we have immediately after all the miracles that took place in Egypt, after the splitting of the sea, and Amalek, doubt comes at that point. It sounds incredible. How could it be? So Amalek absolutely represents the philosophy of choice. We hear by accident. We all have the right to live our lives exactly as we please. Purim demonstrates a purposeful supervision of Hashem over events that on the face of it seem to be mere chance. And that Purim, that whole story of Purim, Hashem behind the scenes, is the greatest defiance, is the greatest attack, the greatest refutation of the doctrine, if we can say, of Amalek. The philosophy of Amalek, and I've just broken up into another point, if you put it slightly differently, if you think about it, and again, I'm just going to be another 10 minutes at most in the Shiur. What is the philosophy of Amalek? Before Amalek, we could possibly say that there were two schools of thought. We have the pre-Abraham, we have a world of many gods, polytheism, we have paganism, belief in many different powers. Then we have Avraham Avinu, Abraham the Ivri from the other side meaning totally different point of view. Monotheism, he brings monotheism into the world, that there's one God. But what does Amalek bring? Amalek is neither one of the two. Amalek is atheism, which is even worse than polytheism. Why? Because there's always the chance that if you believe in gods, okay, at least you believe in God. It might be the plural. So there's a chance from going from polytheism to monotheism, but the chance decreases from going from atheism to believing nothing to all of a sudden believing in a creator. So again, it's this doubt, and again, it's bringing about this third component, this component of atheism. I don't believe in any purpose, any divine plan. Everything is chance. Everything is haphazard. I can live life exactly as I choose. I wanted to just bring in, when I said earlier about where we see clearly that Haman is a descendant of Amalek. So if you just have to go look at Shmuel Aleph, the book of Samuel 1, where King Shaul HaMelech is given the commandment of going to wipe out the entire Amalek, the entire tribe of Amalek. And he goes and he wipes out man, children, women, wipes them out. But what does he do? He leaves the king. He spares the king named Agag. He also spares the animals. I won't go into the reason for that now, but he spares Agag, the king Agag. Eventually, Samuel the prophet tells Shaul how he'd gone against Hashem's express commandment to wipe out everyone, including the king. There shouldn't be any remnant, beasts, anything, nothing that breathes should be kept alive of the Amalekites. In fact, that led to Shaul being stripped of the kingdom, of the kingship, of his royalty. But in the moment that Agag was alive, before the prophet Samuel put him to death, he was able, together with another woman, to conceive a child. And we have, look what it says in the Esther chapter 3, after these things, the king Ahasuerus appoints, he rises to power, makes great, et Haman ben Hamdata ha'agagi. He is from Agag. He descends from Agag, this king of Amalek, who Saul had allowed to live, even but for a few moments, just to impregnate another woman. We see clearly that Haman is a descendant of Amalek. I want to just point out a beautiful idea that's brought by Reb Moshe Soloveitchik. In fact, it's written down by his son, Rabbi Dr. Joseph Soloveitchik, who said that his father, so the question is, do we have Amalek in our times? Does Amalek still continue? Reb Moshe Soloveitchik says, any nation that aspires to destroy the Jewish people assumes the status of Amalek. So unfortunately, Rahman al-Islam, God help us, in our times, we can certainly say that Amalek exists. Doesn't mean we have to identify people by the color of their skin or what their traditional clothing. No, it's not about that. It's that if there's a nation out there, there's a people out there, there's a doctrine out there wanting to cause harm, wanting to annihilate the Jewish people, that is definitely, in the words of Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, that assumes in modern day terminology the status of Amalek. In fact, what Rabbi Dr. Joseph, the son, Soloveitchik says is that we see it very clearly in the book of Shemot, in the parasha of the Shalach. We're going to read this on Purim. Please all come to Shul Friday morning for the reading. We read that God wages war against Amalek midor dor. Milchama Hashem ba'amalek midor dor. Eternity. It says cloak so expressly. No Rashi's needed. Nothing's really. The verse says there's an ongoing battle between Hashem, everything that's represented by Hashem, spirituality, everything we've gone through, monotheism, and against the doctrine of Amalek. It's not just the story of Purim. It's not just when the Jews left Egypt. It's going to be until the end of days, until Mashiach comes. I want to point out very, very fascinating, where we even see Amalek even even during the times of the Holocaust. So let's think of Yamach Shemor, may his name be blotted, and all the Nazis, Adolf Hitler. I want to point out something very, very, very fascinating. Listen to this. In the Megillas Esther, when we go through the names of the 10 sons of Haman who are hanged, I went through it in Shul the other day. We say this in one breath. All the 10 sons of Haman. We actually find that there are 4 unusual letters in the right column of the Megillah. Ask me, I'll show it to you on Thursday night or Friday. We find that there's a small taf, there's a small shin, a small zayin, and they also find a large vav. Okay, so 4 out of place, wrong size letters that don't fit with the rest of the script of the Megillah. Now, the day after Haman and his 10 sons are hanged, Queen Esther asks King Achashverosh, she says, if I've again found favor in the eyes of His Majesty, in the name of the king, allow the Jews who are in Shushan, and Shushan again, it was the capital, to act tomorrow as they did today. Again, just to quickly explain that, now there's to continue fighting, not only the 13th, but to continue fighting the 14th as well. But listen to this, here where it gets, hopefully the hairs on the back of your arms, neck are going to rise now and for the next 3 minutes. What does she also say? And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. Now, what's surprising about that is the previous day, Haman's 10 sons had already been hanged. So fine, you can understand you're asking, can we continue the war on the 14th? That makes sense. Why are you asking Machar tomorrow to hang the 10 sons of Haman who had already been hanged the previous day? The Midrash explains that the word Machar, tomorrow, has 2 connotations. It can either mean tomorrow that's now, so in other words, literally tomorrow, or it can mean a tomorrow that's in a later time. A future tomorrow, a future date. Okay, now listen, please continue listening. If you're wearing socks and shoes that are about to be blown off. We're told, our rabbis tell us that on the 7th day of Sukkot, that's Hoshana Rabbah, the judgment of the nations of the world is finalized. And if we can understand, and the sentences then are issued, and the terminology they use from the residence of the king. Judgments are aroused and executed on that day. Okay, I'm getting closer to the incredible part. Listen to this. On the 7th day of Sukkot, in the year 5707, okay, 7th day of Sukkot, which is Hoshana Rabbah, which is the day that God seals the verdict for the coming year. It corresponded to the 16th of October, 1946. And you can Google this, October the 16th, 1946, that the 10 cohorts to Hitler were hanged. This followed the Nuremberg trials. Something very interesting. There were meant to be 11 people that were meant to be hanged on that particular day, the 7th day of Sukkot, October 16th, 1946. that, as many of you might know, Goring, who was the 11th, actually committed suicide in his cell shortly before the sentence to hang him was carried out. Now, look at point 2. Returning to the large and the small letters in the name of Haman's sons that I alluded to over here, the small Taf, the small Shin, the small Zayin, and the large Vav. The large Vav equals 6, signifying the 6th millennium, okay, which means from the Hebrew year 5001 to the year 6000, when we believe that by that time Mashiach has to have arrived. Now we're left with then 3 of the letters, the small Taf, the small Shin, and the small Zayin. Taf, the numerical equivalence of the letter Taf is 400. Shin is 300. Zayin is 7, equals 707. The year 707 of the 6th millennium, that's in the year 5000s, would give us 5707. 5707. 10 of Hitler's aides were hung on the 7th day of Sukkot in the year 5707 on October 16th, 1946. I'll just leave you with some questions. Does that mean, well, we know Esther was a prophet. Esther was one of the prophetesses of Jewish history. When the Midrash tells us Machar, king, and maybe the king there, again, obviously the literal meaning is that the king refers to the king Achashverosh. But Hamelech, if I found favor in the king's eyes, maybe Esther is saying to God, God, if I have found favor in your eyes, Machar, there's going to be a time in the future where there are going to be 10 equally heinous, shocking, murderous individuals, and we have to make sure that they too are hanged. Please, if it finds favor in your eyes, allow Machar, allow them the next day for the 10 sons of Haman to be hanged. And as I said, Amalek represents the doctrine of anyone, any nation wanting to eradicate the Jewish people. That would include the Nazis, Hitler, Yamach Shemom, their name be blotted out, just like Amalek forever. And I'll end with that. I hope you all enjoyed, and I look forward to, please God, seeing you all Thursday night. I've sent out the time, so please just look at the emails again. It is going to be COVID compliant. We'll have it outside, weather permitting. Please God, I know weather rain is forecast, but if it doesn't rain, we're going to be doing the Megillah readings at night and in the day outside. And just a reminder that please, it is a command, it is a mitzvah to listen to the Megillah both by night and by day. So I hope everyone does try and make it to shul. Just wish everyone a good night. Thank you for joining.